Do you trust your police service? Well, over 1,000 Metropolitan Police officers are currently suspended or on restricted duties following a move to crack down on rogue coppers. Shockingly, there's been a 66% increase in the number sacked for gross misconduct, while reports of alleged misconduct have doubled in the past year alone. The Met's investigation was triggered after the convictions of two serving officers, Wayne Cousins and David Carrick. Their horrific crimes sent shockwaves throughout the country. But it seems things aren't set to get better anytime soon. 60 officers a month are expected to be booted out, with Deputy Assistant Commissioner Stuart Cundy admitting it'll take years to get rid of dodgy bobbies. So, do you trust the Met to get rid of their rotten apples? Well, joining me to discuss this is former Metropolitan Police Chief Superintendent Dal Babu. Dal, thank you so much for coming on the programme. I mean, what is your reaction to this? It's clear that the Met has definitely got some bad eggs in there, but the extent is really quite shocking.
Yeah, good evening, Alex. I think this is long overdue. I think the Met at some point has to lance the boil. There will be some bad publicity in the short term, but the Met has got to retrieve trust. We rely on trust, and at the moment, trust is at the lowest level it's ever been in the police. I went to a dinner the other night. In the old days, people who used to complain about the police were people, black people, Asian people, young people, LGBT, gay people. But now it was middle-aged women in their 60s at the dinner party who were complaining, saying that they didn't trust police. So the police have got to do something radical. And I think this is an example. They've revisited cases, looked at decisions that have been made previously, and decided they wanted to raise the bar so they can get rid of or put people before their panels who will then make a decision about whether individuals are retained or sacked. I think the other thing the point needs to be made is that the decision was with the police in the past, and far more officers were dismissed after they've been convicted of offences or because of poor behaviour. When the decision went to independent, legally qualified people, the number of police officers who kept their jobs despite poor behaviour went up. So this is really, with the changes that have been put in place, it goes back to the police officers. And there's one example, I think I was speaking to one of your producers earlier on. There's one example where a police officer had been out drinking. She'd gone into a local changing outfitters and then used the changing rooms as a toilet. She then lied to her supervisors and eventually was put before a gross misconduct panel. And an independent person reviewed the evidence and decided she could keep her job.
I mean, looking at some of these statistics, I want to point out that I've always been a very vocal supporter of the police. I don't want that culture coming over from America where people are saying defund the police and you can't trust the police. I think trust in police is absolutely essential in any civil society. But looking at some of these statistics, I am shocked. We're talking about 1 in 34 are being investigated, 1 in 34 Met Police. Of the over 1,000 currently suspended on restricted duty, you've got some 450 being investigated for historic allegations of sexual and domestic violence. I mean, as you were saying, women now are the people who are most concerned about the police. But why is it taking so long? Why does Stuart Cundy say it's going to take years to get rid of officers?
Well, I think we've got to have a fair process, Alex, because the danger is that if we have a knee-jerk process and officers aren't treated, don't go through the due process, then they can challenge these decisions. So I think Mark Rowley has said on a number of occasions that he wants the process to be much simpler. But it's also important to ensure that people are treated fairly. And when they come before gross misconduct panels, I think in the past, when you had this situation where people kept their jobs. I mean, my own experience of trying to get rid of police officers was like pulling teeth. It was incredibly challenging. So I think this new process, this new procedure, will balance things out and make it a much straightforward process if you need to get rid of a rogue police officer. But remember that
The Met Police have come under a lot of scrutiny, obviously, because of those two very high-profile, very disturbing cases I mentioned in the opening. And we've also seen very publicised changes at the top of the Met Police force. But does this also affect other police forces? Is the same sort of clearing out exercise going to happen in forces up and down the country?
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I think it's a danger that people refer to the Met. I mean, the Met is a quarter of the entire police force, but there are other big forces around the country, Greater Manchester, West Midlands. And actually, if you look at those big forces, they've got similar kind of issues. They've got similar allegations that are being made against police officers. Greater Manchester Police were in the news a couple of weeks ago, not only for the miscarriage of justice, where a man was served 20 years for a rape he never committed, but they also were accused of assaulting a woman who was in custody, which has been investigated. So I think it's important not to make this a London issue. This is a police-wide issue, and I think what we're seeing is people like yourself who've generally been very, very supportive of police. Even people like you, Alex, are now sort of questioning whether there is trust in the police. And what we have to remember is trust walks towards you and disappears on the back of a horseback. And that's the situation we're in at the moment. And we rely on members of the public working with the police. I think the vast majority of police officers I deal with, many of my friends are police officers or ex-police officers, they do a good job. But unfortunately, when people will focus on the Wayne Couzens and the David Carricks of this world.
Dal, thank you so much for coming on. Well, joining me to discuss this and today's other big stories, a journalist and campaigner, Mike Buckley, Apprentice star Joanna Jarjue and Conservative commentator Benedict Spence. Mike, I'm going to start with you. I have been a huge advocate for the police, and I want to look at these statistics and say to myself, well, 1 in 34 are being investigated, so therefore I hope 33 and 34 are upstanding, brilliant police officers facing extremely difficult working circumstances. But the statistics are harrowing. I mean, this is really concerning. We constantly hear people saying we need more police on streets, with 60 about to go every single month. How on earth are we going to fill those numbers?
I mean, it's staggering. I mean, I've been talking to a number of people about this today, as I'm sure you have as well, and we're all aware of, the crime statistics and the dangers that people face in society, whether that's from, gang violence or gun crime or knife crime. I mean, much more knife crime, thankfully, than gun crime, I suppose, but you don't want either. Burglaries, etc. We all know people that have been burgled and nothing's happened. People get their bikes nicked, nothing happens. What are the police doing? There's a lot of police officers in London. Now, I realise they've got more important things to deal with, say, than bike crime, but it should be dealt with. Every crime should be dealt with. We had a ludicrous situation recently where we had the Home Secretary saying every burglary should be dealt with. Well, that's her job. Why has she not been making that happen? Why has the government not been making that happen? I just feel like the government's been asleep at the wheel. The Met's clearly been getting worse for years and years. They've done nothing. It's the same with, the concrete scandal. For years and years, they've been letting these things get worse and worse and worse. It finally erupts into the public domain, and suddenly there's a big scandal. Where's this come from? It's the government's responsibility in the end.
Yeah, I mean, Joanna, as a fellow female, the two big stories, Carrick and Couzens, was horrifying. So pretty much every single woman in the country felt less safe as a result of that. Now these statistics, 450 being investigated for historic allegations of sexual and domestic violence. I've always stood up for the police, but it is hard, isn't it, now as a woman, to know if you can trust the very people you need to trust the most?
Yeah, absolutely. It's in this climate, especially when you're seeing it from the general public and you think, if I was to report a crime that is, misogynistic, or even at the worst case scenario, a rape, is it actually going to be dealt with the right way? We saw some of the things that came out of Baroness Casey's report about the rape kits that weren't handled properly. So that's a big kind of issue institutionally. But in terms of just being a woman on a day-to-day, or on a night, and something potentially happens to you, you do kind of think to yourself, well, who am I actually going to trust? Who can I actually call to help me in this situation?
I mean, do you think it's just something about the police and machismo, or is this a sort of portrait of society at large?
I think it's a bit of both, but I think that, I'm kind of glad in a way that we're starting to see these numbers now that are increasing, and, that we're actually seeing police getting weeded out, because I feel like for a number of years we've been gaslighted. I feel like we've been gaslighted, for me personally, in the black community in terms of what we go through with the police. And I think that to an extent as well, women have been gaslighted when they report something about a police officer, maybe even if it is domestic violence, but it isn't, treated with the right amount of, respect and also seriousness.
Benedict, I'm sure these statistics shock you as they do anybody, but do you think the police are broken beyond repair? What's gone on to create this situation? What needs to be done to clean it up?
I don't think it's broken beyond repair. I'd go back actually there to what Joanna just said, which is that at least you're hearing about it now. For a long time, it was sort of swept under the rug. And actually, we need to remember, by and large, our police force is a lot better run and it's a lot more squeaky clean than most around the world. That's not to excuse what's been going on, but actually, in many countries around the world, it is accepted that the police are corrupt and that is just the cost of doing business. What needs to happen to improve... One thing that needs to be said, you touched upon the two examples of the police officers who were arrested for committing very heinous crimes. Being a police officer carries a great amount of power and respect and trust from members of the public. Predators, violent criminals, that sort of person will always look for a means to wield power where possible, to exploit it, to find victims. People will always do that. And actually, it's very difficult to guard against. Not impossible, but it is very difficult to guard against. Again, at least we are finding out about this. And, steps are being taken late in the day, admittedly too late, but steps are being taken to address this. But that's the thing. What ultimately is going to improve the performance of the rank and file police officer? Ultimately, as you just said earlier, Mike, people are not having burglaries attended, they're not having assaults attended, they're not having all sorts of things attended. Why? Because there are not enough police officers. Ultimately, the police have to deal with a lot more.
Even fewer, 60 a month are being
They have to deal with a lot
jobs.
more today. There are more criminal offences being created every year. They have to deal with a lot more than they've ever had to do before. And yes, the Met is a very large body, but frankly, we need there to be more police officers so that they can attend these sorts of things. So on the one hand, you will have police officers who are bad eggs. You will always have those, and we need to root them out. But it's the same as with the NHS. Doctors and nurses underperforming because they are asked to do too many things. They physically cannot attend to all of these things. Mistakes happen in that situation. So we also need to look at how many police, how well trained they are, or safeguarding, all of that. But ultimately, it's more boots on the ground, more bobbies on the beat. Until you actually do that, you can't really hope that the police that are already there will improve the situation.
I mean, we asked the public if they trusted the police, and only 14%, 14% said yes, 86% no. And looking at some of these comments, they're quite heartbreaking. Timothy says, in the old days, the police had to be beyond reproach. Now it's a job like any other. They're a very good police, but I trust them as much as any other organisation. That sort of romantic feeling that, your Bobby on the beat was the pillar of the community, gone. Yeah. Neil...
Unless you lived in South Yorkshire, I suppose, in which
Neil
case
says,
it's always been negative. This sort of reminiscing about the good old days when police officers were good. I'm sorry, you've always had bad coppers. You've always had police forces, and I do mention South Yorkshire again as an example where for decades there was institutional corruption going on there. It does go back a long way.
Neil says he has an old army mate serving in the police, and he doesn't have faith in them either. I mean, Mike, like I said earlier, it's so important for the public to trust the police, to have a functioning, safe community. What can the police do to rebuild that relationship?
I mean, I'm just going to comment on what Benedict said, and I agree wholeheartedly. We do need more police officers. We also need more backroom staff. I mean, we know from 2010 up to sort of 2019, they cut 20,000 police officers. That is a lot. It's no wonder that we all thought, where have all the police officers gone? Because they'd simply gone. The government, since 2019, has been recruiting more numbers. But I was speaking to somebody who works in the police recently. They said at the same time, they're still cutting backroom staff, so it doesn't increase overall capacity. Which is just, I mean, it's effectively sending a light to us to recruit more of these people, get rid of more of these people. It's an austerity problem. It's a government that refuses to spend on the public realm. And no wonder when there are enough police officers, doesn't justify them making mistakes, doesn't justify them getting stressed, doesn't justify them doing the wrong thing at all. We need to root out the bad police officers. To rebuild trust, we have to have, not just in the Met, but across the country, as your colleague just said, the Speaker just said, we have to make sure that all the bad eggs, they're not bad eggs, they're bad people, are rooted out. And I get the thing, it has to be a robust process so that people can't, the wrong decision made, but it has to be done swiftly.
It does.
If that means more capacity being put in place to do that, that has to happen, because otherwise we won't trust them.